What's up, YouTube? Des the Mess back once again. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. And today we're going to be talking about witchy stuff. I'm just kidding. But we are going to be talking about ritual. And I guess a little bit about witchy stuff, but nothing too woo-woo, as they might say. So, the main point of ritual, in my opinion, is to summon feelings or ambitions or some sort of emotion or positive energy, if you will, from within to make a positive effect on the outside world. Ritual is used in all sorts of different ways, from the stereotypical waving the wand and standing over a pentacle and an altar and all that stuff, lighting candles and incense, having intentions, maybe if you believe in that sort of thing, invoking or evoking gods, spirits, demons, that sort of thing. Ritual is also drinking coffee every day, smoking a cigarette every couple of hours, brushing your teeth, all the stuff that you do to make yourself pretty, maybe put on makeup and clean your face. A lot of people think of ritual mostly as the woo-woo aspect, or like maybe you went to church. If you were Catholic and you went to mass, that is a form of ritual, although they might not use that word. People who practice magic and various spiritual paths probably use some sort of ritual, even if they don't always call it that. Prayer and meditation are forms of ritual, and they're really important for bringing out those feelings that I was talking about. So why do I use ritual if I'm a self-described Satanist slash atheist? Well, the short answer is I think it's fun. I like putting on a robe and a funny hat and waving a wand and having an altar set up. You can kind of see I've used my bookshelf back there as a makeshift altar. What you probably can't see, because it's a little bit further away, is I have an incense tray on there, my Baphomet statue. I put a little goofy Christmas ornament that I was gifted. It's a guitar with an American flag, mostly to be ironic, of course. Anyway, all of that invokes different feelings for me about how I carry myself. It reaffirms the values that I carry, right? I've got cards on my altar from friends. People gave me those. It reminds me that I'm connected to them. Obviously, the Baphomet statue, basically, because of my religion, I want that reminder every day that these are the things that I stand for. The incense is nice to just light every once in a while if I meditate. Meditation's something I need to do more. I don't do a whole lot of. It's really good for me. I'm gonna talk about how I meditate. I had mentioned in a previous video that meditation's really powerful, and you can use it in a variety of ways. One of the main ways I have used meditation in the past was to try and get my mind as quiet as possible and kind of set forth a vision of what it is that I'm looking for. Most of the time, that vision was literally just to shut up my anxiety. And making a habitual practice of it, a ritual, if you will, increases your odds of getting to that quiet space, or getting to the affirmative space, or getting to whatever headspace that you're trying to summon by doing it regularly. So, a technique that I have found useful when I meditate, I call it a layering technique. I'm not sure if there's like a specific name for it, but I call it layering. The idea is I'm going to get myself into a quiet space, and then I think, okay, so here I am in my room, there's no music playing, maybe there's incense burning, I'm just in a quiet space. I'm probably not humming, maybe I'm quietly, in a whisper, counting down 10, 9, getting myself into that headspace. And then I think, what is quieter than this? So I think what would a version of me in a quieter, more peaceful environment look like? And that puts me in a different headspace. So I imagine myself sitting, we'll say, in the woods, right? Woods that I invented. They're not a particular set of woods, it doesn't matter. I'm surrounded by trees. I hear there's like a pond in front of me, maybe a waterfall or a stream is like breathing water into it, and it's like a babbling brook or whatever, so I can hear the water rushing, but it's not so loud that I can't focus. I might hear the wind rustling through the trees, maybe there's birds chirping. And then I think, what would that person meditate upon to get into an even deeper quiet space? So that person, if they thought that was a little bit too loud, might want to imagine herself in a cornfield, just surrounded, wheat or corn or whatever, just empty, quiet field, just the rustling of the vegetables, the wind going through it. You probably wouldn't hear the sound of birds because it's a lot less crowded. There's no trees. So we're going deeper than that even. I'm thinking, what is quieter than this cornfield or the wheat field where the wind is blowing and I can't really hear anything, right? There's no rustling, there's no real animal noises, but I want it quieter. So I think, what would it be like on top of a mountain where it's freshly snowing, but the wind is calm, so there's no animal noises? Now, I don't know about you, but if you've ever been outside on a snowy day when people aren't driving around, I'm thinking of like suburban or rural area, there's just the quiet, almost non-existent tapping of the snowflakes, and you can barely hear it unless you're focusing. That's what I'm thinking next. So what is quieter than that? This person on top of the mountain is still thinking that's too much noise for me. So now I'm like, well, what would it be like on the bottom of the ocean? Say I was surrounded by a protective bubble of oxygen, only I can breathe in. The water pressure is so great that nothing can get into it, and I can't get out. I'm just sitting on the bottom of the ocean. I can't hear anything because I'm surrounded by water. Fish don't really make noise inside the water, and if they could, I couldn't hear them anyway because they're on the outside of that bubble. But I'm still aware that I'm underwater. So as calm and as peaceful as that is, I bring myself to think, what is even more quiet? What is even more calm than that space? And I find myself just sitting on the moon. And there's no sound because I'm in outer space. There's no people around, there's obviously no animals, no one can breathe. I'm in several layers now where I have mustered the idea that I could sit on the moon in quiet and meditate. What would that person think of? So you can see how these layers add up, right? Now, what do I do when I'm done with this? So if I'm following along, typically I would have some very soothing light music on. I want to do this for about 10 to 30 minutes max, because after that, personally, it's too tiring for me. 10 minutes is like light meditation, 30 is heavy meditation, maybe 15 to 20 is a good sweet spot, especially if you're trying to get into the practice. I have to pull myself back out of that eventually. So towards the end of the meditation, I'm just layering it back. Okay, that person on the moon has poofed out of existence. So it's the person on the ocean, and they cast the bubble away. And then it's the person on the mountain, and they brush all the snow away. And it's that person in the field, and they snap their fingers, and all of the corn or wheat or whatever was surrounding them disappears. And then that person at the babbling brook claps their hands, and suddenly the forest disappears. And then I'm just left there with myself, meditating, able to open my eyes again, and I think, wow, I just focused for the last 10, 20, 30 minutes, depending on, again, how deep this meditation is going. on finding new ways to get quiet in my head. And I got rid of the anxiety because I was focused on several layers of what would this imaginary version of me do. And for me, that's super calming, it's super empowering. If I needed to solve a life problem or just have some sort of clear mind to really focus on it, that's how I would go about it. I would just sit down, I would find all these layers, I would think, what would I be thinking of if I could just be on the moon thinking about how to go about this problem? And that's super huge. It's incredible how just sitting with yourself for an extended amount of time you're able to do this. For me, I should speak from my experience, because some people have aphantasia and they can't actually envision this in their mind. I'm personally not sure how that would work for someone who didn't have a visual imagination, and I'd be interested in hearing from people who have this phenomenon to understand how they might meditate or how they bring their imagination about. I have a friend who is an artist who has aphantasia. He cannot see things in his mind. He verbally, in his mind, describes something when he's drawing. And that blows me away, right? I'm not much of a visual artist. I like drawing and doodling, but I'm not particularly good at it. My strength is more in music and writing. So to think about that, like, if I want to draw something from memory, I have to think about it in my head. And my brain is only giving me like a 90% idea of what it is that I'm drawing. So having to describe that to myself, that blows me away. I suppose it's similar to how I memorize song lyrics, or if I was making a speech, or I'm learning Japanese right now. It's probably similar to like the repetition of learning vocabulary and things. But the idea of not having that visual in my head is totally foreign to me. So to wind this all back, meditation is just one form of ritual. And if you liked that little section there, about meditation, use it as a reference. It helped me a lot when I was in rehab and going through therapy after that. They talk about meditation a lot in AA, especially once you get steps 10, 11, and 12, about just sitting and meditating and being with yourself, and focusing on what could come in the day, and then at the end of the day maybe winding it down and saying, here's what I did and here's what I could have done and whatever else. So now I want to talk about prayer. Prayer is something I personally do not find effective for myself. I also, as an atheist, don't believe prayer as in the, I'll say magic, because that's the best way to describe it. If you're praying for any god or spirit or demon or whatever you're praying to change your life in some way, that's a form of magic. You are appealing to some power of the universe that you believe has some control over things to change that. And if you want to get into semantics, right, if you believe that whatever God you believe in is all powerful and all knowing, then praying is kind of useless, because if you're asking God to change something that's in God's plans, why would they do that? Right? They already laid it out, and it's just time is going to flow in this chain reaction. There's no free will. You can get into all that sort of stuff. I'm not going to get too far off topic with that, but you can understand why I myself as an atheist, I can't find prayer applicable in that way, because the idea of appealing to like the power of the universe to change something in my tiny insignificant life in the grand scheme of all that is existence as we know it doesn't make sense to me. So for me, prayer is about personal appeal, right? In the same sort of way that meditation is. People who are more spiritual or theistically religious will say prayer is about asking talking to God, and meditation is about listening. To me, meditation is about listening to myself, and prayer would be about making some sort of affirmation. I talked a little bit about this in one of my other videos. I have a spiritual Satanist prayer book. I don't reference it much these days. It helped me get through rehab. It helped me, tackle some of the obstacles that lay in my path in making AA work for me as someone who doesn't believe that prayer has a direct effect on my life or the universe or someone else's life, right? Like, I couldn't pray myself out of addiction any more than I can pray myself to have a good day now that I'm sober. I'm over 3 years sober, and I did not do that by praying my way into it. I did that through hard work and through community and through outreach and through therapy and through lots of other things. So prayer for me is not about, if I'm going to engage in it, I'm appealing to my higher sense of self. I'm saying, hey, the Desi of tomorrow, can you fucking do your laundry? Like, just please, we got stuff to do. So in that way, I'm not getting down on my knees and like holding my hands together and that's too fantastic. But I also understand why people who use that are engaging in a form of ritual that for themselves is empowering, and it sets some sort of ambition or intention, right? This is the overall theme of ritual, setting intention to effect a positive outcome. I would hope it's a positive outcome. You can get into like different forms of witchcraft and how people use it for curses and hexes and all that stuff. I'm not going to touch all of that. But what I can say is the overall theme of setting an intention and then following through on it. That's what ritual is about for me. So now I feel I gotta focus on how I got to this point. I've talked a little bit about how I navigated AA as a Satanist, but I didn't fully talk about how I became a Satanist and how my spiritual, religious, philosophical journey has developed. So I wasn't raised in a specifically Christian household. My parents believe in God, I've talked to both of my parents at different points throughout my life about God and about all these sorts of things. And the general idea was that they believe in God, even if they don't always know what to call it. And I think that's pretty fair, right? Like, we don't have to know if you believe in a God. You don't have to know what it is that you're connecting to believe in it. I've had AA sponsors who said the same thing, that they don't really know what it is they're connecting to. They just feel like someone's listening. Or they feel like that there's this underlying positive thread moving through their life. I appreciate that a lot more than what evangelists will do and what, theocrats will do, where it's my God means your law and you gotta do what I say. That's just dangerous. It's awful for democracy. It's awful for a lot of things. I'm getting off track here. So, because I wasn't raised in a specifically Christian home, I had ideas about who Jesus was and who God was. My grandmother was Catholic, and that was a mixed bag of things. My grandfather was more agnostic. As he's gotten older, he's come to just believe in a God. Again, probably not the Christian God, just his own personal version of that. And he's never used that in a political way like my grandmother started to as she got older and like really dug her heels into her more Catholic roots. But I tried church, the first house that my mom had for us, we lived with my grandparents for a long time. So when we finally got our own house, where it was just my mom, me, and my sister, we tried the local church there. We went to service on Sundays sometimes, and we each did the vacation Bible school that they had for like a week or two. I don't remember. It just wasn't for me, right? I was like 14 maybe. And I don't know if I was too old for it at that time, that it wasn't going to sink in, or I was developing, a more skeptical, philosophical approach to life. But I was like, yeah, Jesus sounds like a decent role model for people, but just not what I'm looking for. Sometime around the age of 15, I started meeting people who practiced witchcraft, and I didn't know a whole lot about it. I believed in supernatural things. I just wasn't sure what I believed in yet. So, of course, I end up picking up books about dark magic because I'm edgy. At this point, I'm a teenage boy, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna practice this dark magic and summon demons and all that stuff. And I didn't know why it didn't work. The short answer is because it doesn't. If I don't want to knock anybody's beliefs, but looking back on that stuff, it helped shape my ideas going into my 20s and now my 30s. But as a teenager who thought that essentially I was going to talk to demons and be able to curse people and throw fireballs and stuff, I did not get what I was expecting to happen. I read books that talked about necromancy and stuff, and I thought I could actually talk to the dead. I think there is merit in those things if you go back to what I was talking about with meditation, the idea that I could summon a past version of one of my someone I knew specifically. I don't think I could talk to one of my ancestors because I don't know any of them, right? If for whatever reason I wanted to summon my grandmother in my mind, I would just remember all the times that she talked about Ellen DeGenerate, and that's why I never came out to her. So stuff like that is kind of useless to me, unfortunately. I still have several of those books. My bookshelf is pretty full. I've got a lot of books about witchcraft and philosophy and Satanism. But none of that stuff worked for very long for me. I found Wicca around 16 or 17. I knew a couple of people who practiced it. I was kind of all in on that. I did a couple of rituals with people. I practiced on my own pretty regularly. I was on a couple of internet forums talking to people about it. It kind of became a special interest for me for a while. I've largely fallen out of it. My problem with Wicca goes back to the way it was formed. So you have Gardnerian, and there's a couple other different types of Wicca, and maybe I should have brushed up a little bit before I talked about this. But a lot of them were started by guys in the 40s through the 60s, when there was kind of a spiritual, new age revival. And you can kind of see where the sexism comes in when people start talking about yeah, you have a priest and a priestess and everyone runs around naked, right? They call it skyclad. And for some people that's extremely freeing, and I totally support that. It's not something I really got into. If I was practicing by myself, I might do that once or twice, but the idea of being around other people naked was frightening to me, and it still kind of is. But I can also, looking at it with a feminist lens now, understand how that could be abused by someone starting a coven who just wants to see everyone else in the nude. And that's really dangerous. It can lead to a lot of predatory behavior. I'm all for, people expressing themselves however they feel, if they're comfortable. I just couldn't. I couldn't do it. I considered myself a solitary practitioner. I read a bunch of different books by several different authors, trying to figure out exactly what my path was. Another aspect of Wicca I don't really appreciate looking back on it was there's the potential for cultural appropriation. There are a lot of pagans in general who kind of go back to their roots, and what they'll do is they'll find out that they have like Scottish or Irish heritage, so then they go back and they worship Celt gods. That's reasonable. People who grew up in the Scandinavian or Germanic areas will like go back and worship Nordic, Norse gods and stuff. And like that's all well and fine. It's not fine when you're a white woman with locked hair worshiping Egyptian gods that you have zero connection to, and then fighting because you got a vision from them in one of your dreams. You're just racist, and you're culturally appropriating from people who, if you're white, you've largely had advantage over your entire life, and now you're impeding on their ancient rights and customs. So it's not that's I've participated in that as a dumb teen and 20 something, and now I know better, so I don't. But there's a lot of that. There's a problem with the usage of white sage because it's a largely American indigenous spiritual herb, and white people just buy it and sell it freely and think that they're cleansing their house. And again, that's culturally appropriative. What we've done to the indigenous folks on this land is disgusting. And even in 2023, there are people who sell white sage or white sage spray mists, and they're usually white retailers, and there's a lot of problems with that. So Wicca at its core isn't bad. How people tend to use it to form predatory covens, to culturally appropriate, to kind of people will use it to end up in like a conspiracy theory rabbit hole. And again, I'm going to touch on this in a later video about how people become conspiracy theorists and how I got out of that thinking. So the amount of people I've seen in witchy circles who are like anti-GMO and anti-vaccine, some of them are anti-trans people, right? They don't believe in non-binary people, for instance, because they have a duotheistic, meaning they believe in two gods maybe, or if they believe in multiple gods, maybe they're slightly more progressive, but that's person-to-person basis. I'm not going to judge everyone. I'm just going to say what my experience has been, is that largely they view, well, I believe in a male god and a female goddess, so there's nothing in between, and you can't be the other. You were born that way. You should embrace your, feminine divinity or masculine divinity and stop. And when I look back on that stuff, I got into Wicca because I wanted to explore the feminine divinity in me, because I was an egg of a trans person and didn't know that. And I wanted to explore and experiment with feminine energy in my life without fully committing to it, because I didn't think that was okay as a quote-unquote boy at that time in my life. So there are a lot of problems with Wicca and neo-paganism in general. A lot of it gets tied up in fascism, which can be really disgusting, especially when you get into like Nordic and Roman pantheons. Fascists really love the Roman gods and Roman iconography. I'm not going to touch on that. There are fascists in Satanism. There is the Order of Nine Angles or Joy of Satan. Both of those are fascist groups. They're anti-Semitic. Joy of Satan, masks itself as this progressive, spiritual, theistic Satanism. They have all these prayers and a lot of meditation material, and then when you start reading their deeper philosophy, they're just very anti-Semitic. The Order of Nine Angles, very similar. They are just completely fascist. They believe that they are summoning Satan to the earth to start like an Aryan race, basically. They want to continue Hitler's work and do that under the guise of Satanism by destroying as much of the population as possible. A lot of them end up being terrorists. Some of them end up being cyber terrorists, which is more or less harmful, but they do a lot of writing. They have secret underground clubs that they visit. From what I understand, Joy of Satan is all online. Order of Nine Angles meets in person. Either way, both of these are dangerous anti-Semitic groups, and they use the ideas of ritual and philosophy and their religion or their spiritual ideas as a way to bring people into this evil, disgusting form of thinking. So I can't attach myself to paganism anymore. I have friends who are pagans who don't do the wonky, culturally appropriative stuff. If they did, I've called it out. And that kind of segues into how I have developed as a solitary practitioner for most of my life. So again, right, 13 years old, I try the local Christian church and it doesn't work out for me. 15 and 16, I start messing around with witchcraft. By about 19 or so, I had discovered LaVeyan Satanism. Now, LaVey uses his idea of rituals, one I still carry with me, and he actually borrowed it and, kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? He paraphrased from Aleister Crowley, who is also an awful human being. I'm not going to talk about him because there's a lot I could say, but his roots in the 20s, of course, is kind of what led to the neo-pagan revival in the 40s that, people still practice today. Point is, both of them had the idea that ritual is the practice of using intention, it's the art and science of setting our will to our intentions. So in LaVey's terms, because I'm a little bit more familiar with that, if I'm doing a ritual, it's psychodrama. I've talked about this in another video too. So I don't wave the wand and think the world changes around me. I wave the wand because I think, gee, this is funny that I'm in a robe and waving a wand over a burning candle and incense. Maybe I'll fucking do my homework. And when I adapt it that way, it's like, oh yeah, remember I did that whole goofy thing to like affirm myself and bring myself into my power and set an intention for the next day. I'm gonna follow through on that, maybe. I'm autistic, so it's not that's not set in stone. But all of that is to say, I always appreciated LaVey, borrowing from Crowley the idea that ritual was something I do to affirm my intentions and to make some effect on the outside world. It's the change in situations in accordance with one's will. And that's really powerful when I adapt it the way that I have from my early 20s to today. I still use that concept of ritual in things like simply burning an incense and meditating, or studying, or whatever. There was a while where I was drinking tea every single day when I got home from work, and that became a ritual. It just put me in a different mindset. I'm out of work, I'm gonna have my tea. That was it, right? Like, there's nothing more to that. It's a ritual for me to take my meds every day. I don't do it all the time because I'm bad at remembering, but I've set reminders in my phone so that 9 times out of 10 I remember now. That's a ritual. Knowing that I have different apps and resources that I can use to do this helps me set those intentions, and using those resources is a form of ritual. So now I'm 20 something, right? Like, at this point in my life, I found LaVeyan Satanism. I'm not going to be in it for very long, but I don't know that. So 2011 to 2013 essentially is when I'm identifying with LaVeyan Satanism and doing ritual and vibing. I met a girl who was kind of in between what she wanted to do with different pagan paths. We talked a lot about that. I was like glad that we could talk about that because Those are the type of people that I surround myself with, is people who have open minds, who want to discover what more there is to this life. So she and I, talked about a lot of different things, and she had a few friends who were involved in a coven. I was like, I've never done that, and I've always wanted to. I've always wanted to try. It was not for me. So we had 3 meetings. The first meeting was like an interview, and essentially it was like, what do I believe in, what they believe in, where they can meet, what are my expectations for the group, right? It's a lot like a job interview, except we're talking about magic and stuff. And I basically said I wanted someone to practice ritual with, right? Like, I have my goals as a budding magician, and they have theirs. And if we, can meet in the middle, that would be great. What I didn't understand was the nature of this group. It was a vampire court or a vampire coven. I'm not going to touch on a lot of that because there are a lot of layers. What I do know is there are several different types of vampires. There are the obvious ones who, not obvious to people, but I mean, there are people who enjoy consuming blood. That is not a me thing. It never has been. To each their own. There are emotional or psychic vampires who supposedly feed off the emotions or feelings of others, and it is said that when they enter a room, everyone feels the drain. I've never got that. I use psychic vampire as like kind of a slur for people who just drain me to talk to. If you've ever seen What We Do in the Shadows, there's a guy who's a psychic vampire. The way that he goes about just draining the energy from people, the way he talks to them, is a pretty good exaggeration of what I view people like that as. So then there's like elemental vampires, which I don't totally understand. I guess they get their energy from like fire, water, earth, and air, or one of them, or two. I don't know how it works. The point is, so we had this first meeting, and then we had the actual like meeting with the group, or a lot of the group. I don't really know how many people were in it, but I've met maybe less than 10. Some of them I was familiar with from outside, and some of them I was not, and whatever. Meeting new people is always weird for me because I'm socially awkward and autistic and a Satanist and confused about my queerness and a lot of things going on. So they, drank and had snacks, and we talked about magic for a little bit, and then we did karaoke, and I was like, okay, this is all right. The next group, they talked about how they were planning on getting a phlebotomist, and then they were trying to convince my girlfriend that she was such and such a type of vampire, and then they asked me what type of vampire I was, and I said, I'm not a vampire, I'm just here to do the rituals. And it just felt really weird. There's a lot of flirting going on, so I really wonder if there's like some internal sexual tension thing that like I don't feel comfortable with, and they, it felt like it was potentially leaning into a like, hey, we're gonna do a group sex thing eventually, and that was not what I was looking for. So no like major red flags, I would think, just things that I'm really not vibing with. The whole, what kind of vampire are you? And you've got to be some, and it's like, I'm just not. Like, I don't think about it that way. So I let them be them, and I let us be us, and I said to my girlfriend, like, I don't care if you want to practice with them, but that's not what I'm doing. And then I continued to just go about my own business. And then the Satanic Temple happens, right? And at the beginning, there wasn't ritual, and it was kind of a taboo thing. So this is, 2014, they come into my spotlight, and I'm like, this is kind of what I want, right? It's politically charged. I'm like in the process of moving away from my conservative values into a more progressive alley, and that just made sense to me. So by 2019, I was directly involved with the Ohio group. I tried talking a little bit about ritual magic, and it was like, we don't do that here. And I'm like, but you do. That's its own thing that I talked about in my experiences with TST video, which I will pop up there or this way. One of those directions. It'll be in the corner. Losing my religion. Sorry. And I tried to have those discussions. I tried to talk about how ritual could be used in a psychological respect, the way Anton LaVey talked about it, right? Anton LaVey had what he called greater magic, which was ritual, and lesser magic, which was subtle. That's what you would say maybe an illusionist or a mind freak or, one of those kinds of suggestive types would use. Maybe not so much a manipulator, but it could be used in that way. The idea of lesser magic, which was less ritual focused, would be if I'm going to a job interview and I find out that the person who owns the company that I'm interviewing for really likes the Giants, the football team, I might wear a tie that has the Giants logo on it, and maybe talk about the Giants as if I know what I'm talking about, because it builds rapport with them. I wouldn't do that because I don't like sports, and it would be a waste of my time, and also that would be kind of manipulative. But maybe if I find out by chance that the interviewer's favorite color is red, I might want to wear a red tie. And I think there's, something positive. I just lost focus on my camera there. And we're back. So I think there's something positive to the idea of wearing a red tie if you know someone's favorite color is red. It's not really manipulative, it's just they might like you a little bit more because they know that you're wearing a red tie. It's really goofy how easy it is for people to fall into that sort of stuff. It's Pavlovian, if you will. The idea that I like that color, so therefore I treat that person better. Obviously, that can be used in really detrimental ways, and I'm not going to touch on that so much, but I will say the idea that human psychology is pretty easily triggered and potentially manipulated. That's how advertising works, that's how conspiracy theories work, that's how politics work, that's how magic and ritual works, is I'm putting myself into a headspace of suggestion to follow through on an intention that I have, maybe. Or if I'm doing something with a group, I'm willing to be subject to the will of the group to a certain extent. Consent boundaries and all that stuff have to apply. But all of this brings me back to 2019, where I want to do and continued to do ritual and magic and practice it in a way that makes sense as an atheist to set intentions, knowing that when I read funny words off of a paper or write a little rhyme scheme, as a lot of Wiccans and pagans like to do, it's not necessarily having this outward effect that people might believe it does. And knowing that I'm doing these things for my own sense of self-empowerment. The funny thing is, in 2020, that's when TST released like a list of holidays that they wanted to celebrate and rituals, and then they really incorporated it. And I think that shocks a lot of like straight line atheists. When I say straight line atheists, I mean people who weren't born in religion. They were just, their parents never brought it up. They realized other people had religion, and they're just like, oh, religion, God, that's kind of dumb. I'm not going to do that. So when you talk about things like ritual and magic, they're almost offended by the idea that people engage in them because they think it's all about supernaturalism and woo-woo. And they can't fathom it until you continue to break this down from the psychodrama perspective that LaVey talked about, which was, I'm doing this because it puts me in a headspace to get a thing done in my life, or to give me a sense of hope about a positive outcome I'm hoping for. And some people just never like that. They aren't open-minded enough to think about it in that way, or maybe they do have trauma. Maybe they were grown-up Catholic and the idea of ritual rubs them the wrong way because they're like, no, I did all those masses and terrible things happened to me because terrible things happen in the church. But all of that is to say, ritual is ingrained in human life. We've done it, as far as I know, since the beginning of time. When we didn't know what made it rain and we thought it was a rain god, we did rituals for that. And if we didn't really fully understand why animals existed and that we hunted them to eat them, we would pray over them. Like, thank you to the nature spirits for this harvest, or whatever. Ritual has been entwined with human existence for as long as we've been able to comprehend how it works. You can find evidence of that in places like churches. There is something ritualistic and powerful about being with a group of kin and all having the same kind of emotional input coming in and giving the same back, right? It's why those like snake talking churches are so powerful for people, because they really are invested in that. There's something about the ritual that captivates them. It's why there are large amounts of pagan groups, even if they're quiet about it in public, because there's still social stigma about being a practicing pagan or Satanist. It's why all of these things have existed forever and continue to exist, because people crave ritual. Whether that ritual is having your 9 a.m. coffee every day when you arrive at the office, brushing your teeth and praying before bed, or if it's actually waving a wand and dressing up in the robe and doing whatever. Maybe you think you're appealing to demons and spirits and gods and whatever. And to me, it doesn't matter what the individual thinks about when they're engaging. That's not totally true, but you get what I'm saying there. If someone believes that they're actually communing with a god or a spirit or something, that doesn't make a difference to me if I'm doing the same type of ritual, even if it's alongside them, and not believing in the same reason for doing it. I'm getting a very similar emotional input from what I'm doing. And I've seen that even in AA rooms, right? There are, again, straight line atheists or former traumatized ex-religion people in AA who won't pray. They just whatever, at the end of every AA meeting, everyone holds hands in a circle usually, and we all say the Our Father or the third step prayer. There's a number of different prayers you can do. I might have made my own words sometimes and spoken them under my breath in order to feel like I fit in more, but I still participated in the ritual of holding hands with people in my support group and praying it out. I didn't have to believe in this person's God or this person's God or any God at all, because I don't, in order to get an emotional input of feeling like, wow, I'm supported by the people next to me, and we're both here in this room holding hands because we love and care about each other and we want the best for each other. We're here to show support for each other, and we engage in the ritual of opening the meeting, reading the big book, and then closing it out by holding hands and wishing each other well. There's something magical in that isn't supernatural, and it just happens, and it's the feeling of love, the feeling of support that I get is ritualistic, and it comes from rituals like that. So to wrap all of this up, I have dabbled in a lot of different kinds of rituals and different magical practices. I currently consider myself a chaos magician. If you don't know about chaos magic, it's a lot of sigils and masturbating. I'm not joking. It's a lot of sigils and masturbating and kind of do what you want as far as magic is concerned, because again, I don't care enough to fully invest in something, so the idea of taking a little here and taking a little there and making it work for me means if I feel like I need a certain kind of ambition, maybe I want to feel brave and powerful, I'll fucking pray to Batman. If I want to feel goofy, I can pray to SpongeBob. There's no holds bar on what you can do with chaos magic. And again, I'm a little bit more careful about how I engage in that sort of stuff because I want to avoid cultural appropriation. So the idea that I could take things from pop culture and make them my own, or make my own sigils, right? Nobody really has a ownership over a sigil that I've created except me. And I can talk a lot about sigils. I'm going to keep this video kind of short because I could go on for a while. The basic idea with sigils is you come up with an idea, okay? Say, I don't know, I'm going to use the word wisdom because ritual for me is about introspection and coming up with different ways to approach my life, which leads to a sense of wisdom. So let's go with wisdom. I'm going to write down on a piece of paper WISDOM. Then I'm going to take all of the vowels away. So it's just WSDM, right? The I and the O are taken out. If there were any double letters in that word, I would take those out too. Then what I'm going to do is take that W, S, D, and M and turn that into some sort of... See if I can do this now, actually. I might as well make a live example since I'm talking about it. So here, I've written wisdom. I'm going to take that I and the O out of it. So it's W, S, D, M. Okay? Then I'm going to say, well, how do I make these look cool and funky and witchy, if you will? I'm going to go to the other side of my index card there. I should have used the line side first, but that's beside the point. I'm really good at making sigils, I think. So there's that. And these don't have to be in any specific order. So say I did something like this, right? I'm not super proud of that. It looks like a weird Pokemon face or something. I can add all sorts of different stuff to this to make it even more fleshed out. Maybe I'll mess with the way that the presentation is. So if you're following along, maybe you want to try this. It's pretty simple. It doesn't have to be anything too crazy. And you can just literally add any shapes, whatever. So that looks like a lot better sigil, right? Looking at that, you might not see wisdom out of that. And that's fine, right? And that's pretty basic stuff. It doesn't have to be too complicated. If you're using this for a practice of some kind, like, it just has to be something that resonates with you. There are a few ways to use sigils. The basic idea, for me, is you use it and then you forget it, right? Use once and destroy. So I might use that, say I was, again, trying to get some sort of affirmation of wisdom in my life. I want more wisdom. I need experience or something. You probably want to be a bit more specific. I'm just using wisdom as the example. So I'm going to set up, the robe and the hat and the waving the wands and the incense. And then I have this little cauldron, actually, that I use for burning sigils. I have a little book that I use that I probably could have prepared, but didn't think I was going to talk about sigils. This kind of just happened. And in that little book, I rip out a very tiny, I'm talking like this big. Like, I rip out a very tiny page, a quarter of the size of a Post-it note, and I write my sigil on it, and then I say, this is my intention to get more wisdom, or whatever. It'd be a lot more poetic. And I drop it into the kettle and burn it. Or I set it to flame right there and wait till it gets to the tips of my fingers. And again, be careful if you're playing with fire. Please do it in a safe way. I do not want anybody getting hurt by just, I was told by this YouTuber to set a thing on fire. Please don't do that. Please be safe and consider your surroundings. So for me, in a safe area that's not too enclosed, I burn the sigil and I drop it into the kettle so that it becomes ash. And my idea for my own visualization is I hold all of those ashes, and eventually I have a collection of ashes in this little cauldron, and that's like, wow, this is all of the intentions that I set, and like maybe some of them I've forgotten and they're kind of subconscious, but that doesn't matter. The idea is that they're there, they're collected. I can see a visual representation of work that I've put in to make myself a better person in my eyes. Another way you can use a sigil, which is the masturbation joke I made earlier, is you hold the sigil in front of you and you just go to town and you focus on nothing else, because the idea in a chaos magician's mind, or sometimes they call them chaotes, is to embed that image in your mind. How do you do that? Through climax. Because if you're looking at that and you can make it happen, you can make it happen. I have never successfully been able to do that because I require a lot more visual stimulation, and that's probably TMI. But let me just say, there is nothing sexy enough about a sigil for me to get to that point. So I use the burning method. There are a couple other ways. Some people use tattoos. I do not have any sigil tattoos. I don't really want any. I've considered making a personal one that I could use, and, whatever. Maybe one day. I've made one for my name when I came out as a trans person. I use sigils for things like setting an intention to come into a ritual. For me, that's the whole point. That's the entire point of this video, is to find a ritual process that works for you. Whatever your belief system is. Stay away from cultural appropriation and Nazism and racism and all the other problems that come with different sorts of pagan and neo-pagan beliefs, and that's not all of them. Again, I'm just saying it happens, and you gotta be aware. You have to have your quote-unquote third eye open to be able to see through the bullshit and sort out what's fascism and what's just people meeting in the woods naked to dance and sing and do magic. There are so many different aspects of ritual, and I probably am going to revisit this in the future because I want to talk to other people about it. I would love to have a guest speaker talk about ritual and magic and spirituality. Maybe a few. Maybe it could be a panel. I don't know. The ideas are endless. The point of all that is, if you've made it this long, make me your new ritual. Follow me on YouTube. Check me out. I seem to be doing videos, or posting them anyway, every Saturday. I don't necessarily record them on the same day each week, but that's a me thing, not a you thing. Make me part of your ritual on Saturdays when you see my videos get posted and you hear me talking about them. Like, subscribe, throw me a couple bucks. I'm just doing this to do it, and it's fun and it's interesting, and I love talking about these sorts of things, and I want to talk about them with you. So please drop comments and share this with your friends and see what they think. Let me know what you think. Message me, whatever. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I don't use Twitter as much. I don't know why I keep plugging it. I should probably just switch over to Threads, but I'm mostly shitposting there. Anyway, do all of those things. Let me know what you think. I would love to hear back from you. And with nothing else, here's me closing it out.